Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back, and this is the first of our in this corona enforced break, and today we launch a new series which I'm excited to bring you, and that series is F1 Legacies. And this is going to be a series that looks at people past who have in the past had a big influence on Formula One, and whether they have sadly passed away and no longer with us, or they are currently still with us but no longer part of the sport. It is a chance to take a look back at people who have shaped and influenced Formula One, and celebrate their career and what they have given to us in the sport that we all love, which is of course Formula One. Today we start off with a very special one, and that is Charlie Whiting. Sadly, 3 days before the Australian Grand Prix in 2019, he passed away, but he left an F1 legacy that is worth celebrating. An absolute huge impact on the sport and what we'll come to look at, especially in terms of safety, and a man who dedicated his pretty much entire working career to Formula One. And it's just something that deserves to be celebrated, and he's one of those unsung heroes of the sports. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms of Drive to Survive Season 2 was the fact that there was no Charlie Whiting tribute. So with the Australian Grand Prix, we should have been talking about the Australian Grand Prix in a race podcast today, but obviously that has been cancelled due to the coronavirus. So what better chance to take a look back at the career of Charlie Whiting and his influence on Formula One. On August 12th, 1952, Charlie Whiting was born, and he attended his first Formula One race in 1964. Now, the story behind this is that he lived near Brands Hatch, and that he actually climbed over the fence so that he could get to it. I believe this was a race won by Jim Clark, and it was the first year that the British Grand Prix was held at Brands Hatch. But yes, I have no idea if this story is true or not, but how great would it be if that was your first experience of Formula One? What an amazing experience that would have been. He then, went and through his early life, he wanted to be involved in the sport and trained up as a mechanic. His first experience in motorsport was in British rallying with his brother, where they provided a car in the F5000 British Series for driver Davina Gallica. A year later, he was with the Formula One team Hesketh, but they folded at the end of the year during that. And then in 1978, he would then join forces with Bernie Ecclestone at Brabham Racing. And with that would become his successful period within Formula One. He became chief mechanic during the time where Brabham actually won the World Drivers' title in 1981 and 1983, with Nelson Piquet racking up 2 of his World Championships there with Brabham Racing. That was the highlight of Charlie Whiting's success during his time as a mechanic within Formula One. And then in 1988, he began his long affiliated partnership with the FIA that would turn out to be a 21 career, which would end with his sad passing with 3 days before the 2019 Grand Prix season starting. His first role with the FIA was just as a technical delegate to Formula One, obviously using his experience and knowledge of the sport that he gained through Brabham and Hesketh. He would then obviously advise the FIA as their technical delegate there. And it wasn't until 1997 where he became race director and safety delegate for the FIA, where he probably had his most influential role on the sport. Obviously, in the race director role, Charlie pretty much controlled everything across a race weekend. He was checking the cars under the parc fermé conditions. He was making sure he was the permanent race starter. He made sure that in the stewarding decisions, he was the one who was allowing the interpretations of the rule to be noticed. But it went way beyond this than the track actually on the day as well. In between races, Charlie would go around 2 circuits to make sure that upgrades or tracks were continuing to be maintained up to FIA safety standards, and also any new tracks coming onto the calendar, making sure that their tracks were up to the high standards of the FIA. But the safety element is probably Charlie Whiting's biggest legacy on F1 in terms of his contribution to the sport. This was a really important, passionate thing, and I have no doubt that safety was so important to Charlie Whiting because he grew up in an era of racing where Formula One drivers didn't know whether they were going to finish that race or even survive that race. You know, through the 50s, 60s and 70s, obviously we lost a lot of lives within Formula One, sadly, due to the dangerous conditions that it was driving in. So, you know, safety wasn't really an option for Charlie, it was an absolute necessity. How could we make these Formula One cars as safe as possible? And he had influence in kind of introductions into the sport during his time in stuff like the Halo. Obviously, you know, it's credited in the 2018 Charles Leclerc crash that, you know, it certainly would have saved him from any serious harm in that aspect. The kind of headrest for the drivers, he made massive improvements in the front and the side impact crash structures to improve the safety of the drivers there. The single-seater safety cell, he had a big influence. Obviously that is part of the monocoque structure now. And you know, all these things, his absolute paramount was driver safety, which probably made 2014, with the crash that would later lead to the death of Jules Bianchi, probably even harder for Charlie Whiting to take. But one of his other key characteristics is he was so relaxed, he was calm, composed, and he spoke with authority. And the way he dealt with the whole 2014 situation, with that obviously sad and tragic death of Jules Bianchi, was complete credit to Charlie Whiting. And that is a credit of how he really composed his entire Formula One career. Whenever you hear about people speaking about Charlie Whiting, it was that he just had like a calm composureness to him that kind of relaxed people. It was a calm authority that, you know, when Charlie said something, people would listen. He was widely and massively respected by the drivers. They really kind of, you know, respected his authority and decisions. That key one in terms of, you know, stewarding decisions. They would maybe not necessarily always agree with the decisions that Charlie came out with, but they would certainly respect his decision, and that was the level of authority that he brought up. But he had so many roles within Formula One that now, since his passing, it is almost like 3 or 4 jobs that the FIA have to find to be filled to the standards of what Charlie was doing, because he really made the role his own. And yeah, it was just fantastic input what he could put on things. His successor in race director is Michael Massey, the Australian. Obviously he was brought in as he was very close, well, he lived in Australia at the time, but he, you know, has been given the role full time. And I have no doubt that the stewarding decisions that we did witness this year, that a lot of people had a lot of problems with and controversy over, is because it was probably the least smooth running in terms of those decisions and the time taken to make those decisions in any Formula One season that I can remember. And I feel a large part of that is probably due to it not being Charlie Whiting. Michael Massey rushed into the role, but also Charlie Whiting ensured that there was just a smoothness to the running of Formula One. And yeah, like I said, he was just so good at his job, and everyone had like positive things to say. And you emphasise that in terms of, with his passing, the tributes that came in. Ross Brawn knew him through his entire racing life. You know, they grew a friendship, and obviously was devastated personally, but everyone who kind of, you know, the usual thoughts to friends and family, it was at this time last year. But the main thing they all say as well, that it wasn't just a loss to them, it was a loss to Formula One as a sport. He was absolutely massive and integral to it. He dedicated pretty much his entire life to Formula One. 1976, he was in motorsport. 1977, he was in Formula One. So that is almost, well, it was 42 years that he was involved in Formula One. That is kind of mind-boggling to kind of really comprehend how much of his life he was. And that safety element, I go back to it, that was Charlie Whiting's real legacy on Formula One. Rounding off it, like I said, the safety was it, but he was just such a great person, and he had such a great passion and a great love to Formula One. To dedicate as much time and as much of his life to the sport, it shows you how much he loved the sport, and the fact that he wanted to make it a safer sport for those who were competing in it. The fact that he wanted to make it better in any way that he possibly could. F1 can't get enough of those people, and F1 is certainly in a better place because of what Charlie Whiting did during his career, and he certainly is a massive loss to the F1 community, the F1 paddock, and just, yeah, the entirety of F1. But you know, it's brilliant that we had Charlie Whiting, and it's a brilliant time to remember him. So what I want to round off with this is, guys, if you have any Charlie Whiting stories you want to kind of share, if anyone that was lucky enough to know Charlie Whiting or had experience with him, leave those stories in the comments down below. If you didn't and just have memories of him, just kind of, you know, comment down those below. It's important to remember those people who have made important contributions to the sport that we love, and it would be fantastic to hear your contributions about Charlie Whiting. But there you go, guys, that is the first of the new series on the channel, F1 Legacies. Not sure kind of how regular these will be, but we'll make sure that, you know, a lot of thought goes into who we pick for the next F1 Legacy video on that one. And guys, if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can keep up to date with all the videos on our channel, more just like this one in the F1 Legacies series. We'll be back tomorrow with an F1 Fantasy Weekly episode, so make sure you kind of tune in for that one. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing!